welcome back to the show today. We are talking about NBA trades and how they work. The NBA and the CBA have a lot of rules and regulations around making trades, and it's very confusing. So hopefully by the end of this video, you have a little more clarity on what the heck everyone's talking about. So let's start with something that's very easy to understand. When are you able to make a trade as an NBA team? You can make a trade at any point in time from when your team is eliminated and the trade deadline. So as soon as your season is over, maybe you missed the playoffs, maybe you got eliminated from the playoffs, you can start making calls for trades, but only to teams who have been eliminated as well. If you want to make a trade with a team that's still in the playoffs, you have to wait until they're eliminated or win the championship. After the season is over, you can make trades all summer into the season until early February. On a specific date in February, I think it's a Thursday, you are no longer allowed to make trades. This date is called the trade deadline. Usually the week before the trade deadline, there are a truckload of trades that happen in the NBA. This was when KD and Kyrie got traded from the Brooklyn Nets last year. It's 2023, by the way. The reason being, the NBA wants teams to lock in its roster before the final third of the season. If there wasn't a trade deadline, you might have teams trade their star player for a bunch of draft assets at the very end of the season. Imagine if the Blazers had traded Dame Lillard to the Nuggets on the last day of the regular season for a bunch of unprotected first-round picks. A guy playing an entire season with one team and then playing in the playoffs with another team just ain't right. So when the trade deadline comes around, this is when teams decide if they're going to go for the championship or give up on their season entirely. Let's talk about a couple examples from the trade deadline last year. The Utah Jazz were a team that wisely decided to give up on their season. The Jazz had already traded away their star players before the beginning of the season. The Jazz were starting their rebuilding phase. They wanted to be bad. They wanted to focus on developing young players and acquiring draft assets, not winning. But they actually still ended up winning a bunch of games. So Danny Ainge, the general manager, decided to give up even harder and trade away any player that a team might be interested in at the trade deadline. They ditched Jared Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley, sent them to the Lakers, who needed some solid role players, and they sent Mike Conley to the Timberwolves, who wanted a stronger point guard than D'Angelo Russell. So what did the Jazz get in return from trading away all these players that people wanted? 2 expiring contracts and 1 almost expiring contract. But do teams want expiring contracts? Some do. If you're a team that wants to sign a big name free agent at the end of the season, you're going to need some cap space. That's why the Jazz were happy to acquire Russell Westbrook's giant contract. The Jazz would have taken any giant contract as long as they got draft picks in return. They weren't trying to win this year, so why not take on Westbrook's big contract? Because at the end of the season, they'll be off that contract. Russ will be gone and they'll have $46 million in cap space to sign basically whatever player they want. If they hadn't made that trade, they'd still be paying Mike Conley and Jared Vanderbilt for another season. Put more simply, the Jazz took on a very large, shorter contract in exchange for getting rid of 2 smaller contracts that were longer. And they got a first-round pick out of the deal from the Los Angeles Lakers. The trade deadline is where a team trades their future for their present, like the Los Angeles Lakers did, or they trade their present for their future, which is what the Jazz did. I imagine a lot of people hate him, but Danny Ainge is a great general manager. Now let's talk about the 2 types of trades. There's a simultaneous trade and a non-simultaneous trade. Let's start with a non-simultaneous trade because it's simpler, which is when a team trades a single player for more players or draft picks. Single player, that's important. Usually in a simultaneous trade, salaries have to match, but not in a non-simultaneous trade. A non-simultaneous trade usually happens when a team is trying to lower their payroll, usually to get off luxury tax. This is usually called a salary dump. Let's take an example that's happening right now, the Rudy Gay for John Collins trade. The Hawks are trading John Collins for Rudy Gay and a second-round pick from the Jazz. Collins makes about $25 million a year, but Rudy Gay only makes about $6 million a year. These salaries don't match at all. And remember, since this is a non-simultaneous trade, they don't have to. The Hawks just got $19 million off their books. This salary deficit creates what we call a trade exception for the Hawks. Trade exceptions are unique to non-simultaneous trades. The Hawks now have 1 calendar year where they can take that player, the $25 million from John Collins, his salary, and go over the salary cap with that money. So that's $25 million in going over the cap. Not too bad. But if they don't use it within 1 year, it goes away. So the Hawks may have traded away John Collins just to get off some luxury tax over the next couple years, or they may have a free agent in mind this summer that they're trying to grab. Maybe 2 free agents, because $25 million is a lot of money. Or maybe they just really wanted Rudy Gay. I'm kidding. Now let's talk about the far more common simultaneous trade. In a simultaneous trade, all the salaries of the players have to match to some degree. Now how close the salaries have to be depends on a couple different factors. Like, is the team over the cap? Are they under the cap? How big are these players' salaries? For the sake of making engaging content, I'm not going to read off all the numbers, percentages, and conditions. If you're interested, here's a screenshot. Pause the video video and stare at it for a while. You won't remember them anyway, I don't even remember them. The important thing to remember is the salaries have to match up to go through. If you've ever played with the NBA trade machine, that is what it's doing. It's taking the cap space and the salaries of the players and making sure the trade can be executed. It's a lot of fun to play with if you've never done it. That's why you hear all these names at the end of a blockbuster trade that were thrown into the deal. For instance, Landry Shamet going to the Wizards during the Chris Paul Bradley Beal trade. His contract was thrown into the trade so it could go down. The trade wouldn't have been able to go down unless they threw in Landry Shamet's contract to make the money work. As an NBA player, you do not want to be thrown into a deal like this. It means you're an afterthought, or more commonly known as salary filler. No offense to Landry Shamet, this man's been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So for fun, let's break down the three-team trade between the Celtics, the Grizzlies, and the Wizards, and what every team got out of the deal and what their future goal is. Let's start with the team that everyone believes won the trade, the Boston Celtics. The focal point of this trade being Kristaps Porzingis. This is a big man coming off the best season of his career. The only reason this is risky for the Celtics is that Kristaps Porzingis only has one more year on that deal, so he could walk at the end of this season. Also, Porzingis isn't cheap, and he's kind of injury prone. Now, the Wizards wanted to give up Porzingis because he's good, and they want to win later, not now. Having a good player on a team that's trying to rebuild is only going to hurt them. Now, the Grizzlies received Marcus Smart from the Boston Celtics. They did this for 3 reasons. Marcus Smart is a veteran player and a great leader. Memphis desperately needs a leader. The Grizzlies also need another point guard because Ja Morant is suspended for 25 games. And the third reason is Marcus Smart has 3 years left on that deal. He's paid about $20 million a year, and that's really cheap. Which brings us to what the Wizards received. The Wizards received Tyus Jones, the Grizzlies' backup point guard. Tyus Jones was good. Strangely, the Grizzlies actually win about as many games with Jones as they did Ja Morant. So why would they trade him away? It's because at the end of next season, Tyus Jones will be off his contract, and he's gonna want a lot of money for being so good. That's why the Grizzlies hot swapped in Marcus Smart, a guy that's on a cheaper contract for longer. They don't gotta have that awkward conversation when he asks for money and they don't want to pay him. This is great for the Wizards because they can pay Tyus Jones a lot of money next season and make him their starting point guard. And he can develop as a starting point guard because the Wizards don't want to be good. I mean, the Wizards most likely will be the worst team in the league next year. By design. I'm sorry if you're a Wizards fan, but that's just the way it is. You're gonna have some years of famine in the future. Or more years of, sorry, I'm being mean. Alright, well thanks for being here. Thanks for being at the show. If that was really confusing, it is confusing. It was confusing for me. So do a little more research, or maybe you understand it entirely. But be good to your mothers, eat a corn dog.